Hi there, my name's Johnny Price and you're listening to Adventure Capital, a podcast by WeFunder. In this episode, I had the privilege of interviewing my former boss at Kiva.org, Premal Shah. With typical empathy, profundity and humour, Premal talks about his experiences co-founding Kiva and some of the pros and cons of the for-profit versus non-profit sectors. Every week at WeFunder's office in San Francisco, we host a home-cooked dinner for founders with a guest speaker. This week's dinner was focused on social entrepreneurs. Premal was the guest and we recorded the conversation. It's the first live podcast we've done and we hope you enjoy the discussion. I have the honor of introducing to you guys Premal Shah. I had the privilege of volunteering at Kiva in 2009 and then went back a couple of years later and, as I said, kind of worked for Kiva for 7.5 years, very closely with Premal. Premal is an illustrious member of the PayPal mafia. He then co-founded Kiva and kind of grew that organization into the juggernaut behemoth that is today, and left a few months ago to embark on new adventures. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of that tonight. So Premal, great to have you here.
Thanks, Johnny. I have to say that I was just kind of I was feeling really emotional just watching you. You're just such a grown-up now. Like when we met, we were just kids. I got to tell you all a story about Johnny. Johnny is one of the most incredible people I've had the pleasure of working with. You are. And one of the things that he came from the UK to volunteer as an intern at Kiva. And he made this claim. At the time, my cousin, who was, I think, in high school going to college, was an intern there. And he would make up these, well, maybe it's true. You said that you were like an incredible athlete in over 24 sports. And 14 sports, yeah. You said you're like professional quality. And you held by this story. And so we had this like softball game against another nonprofit here in San Francisco. And, it was kind of competitive. There was like a trophy and everything. And Johnny's in the outfield and everyone has gloves, but Johnny refuses because he is, one of his 14 sports is cricket. He refused to have a glove. I was just like, Johnny, you should wear a glove. Take my glove. He's like, no. And it was like the final thing, like the ball's hit up in the air, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if we catch this, like we're gonna win this nonprofit cup. And Johnny, it's going to Johnny, and he's barehanded, and I'm like, oh, we're gonna lose. And you caught it, diving catch. And on that same evening, you ended up talking to Allie, who you eventually ended up marrying.
It was a great day for me.
He's such a storied member of the Kiva Mafia, and so it's just it's a delight to just kind of share space with you like this.
Cool.
Yeah, and see you in action.
My first question was take us back to the very early days of Kiva. A lot of us here are kind of working for startups or entrepreneurs. What's the founding story of Kiva?
Sure. So I guess my own story is in the mid-'70s, my parents came from India, and I lived in the suburbs of Minnesota. And when I was 5 years old, I went back to India. And, even as a 5-year-old, when you step off the plane and you're in a cab and you see, a kid your age knocking on the window, begging for money, it bruises your heart. And you know that something, especially given the contrast to the suburbs of Minnesota, something doesn't feel right. And, I think it shames one's moral sense. And so I didn't have all those fancy words, but, we all know it when we see it. And that moment and that confusion from that moment, the sadness from that moment was pretty influential. And then in college, luckily, like Regina and I were talking about Muhammad Yunus and, kind of the hope one feels when you learn about microfinance. So in the late 90s, I was in college and kind of bored as an econ major, but professor started talking about microfinance and market-based approaches to poverty alleviation. It was so hopeful. And I learned about Muhammad Yunus, who then 10 years later would win the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in, making small loans to folks who the banks would say no to. And he his famous thing was, I look at what banks are doing in Bangladesh and I do the opposite. So banks lend to men, I lend to women. Banks lend to the rich, I lend to the poor. Banks require collateral, I do uncollateralized loans, and it's a solidarity group that basically guarantees each other's loans. And what he was able to prove in the mid-'70s when he invented microcredit, or was one of the pioneers of microcredit, is that, even if you are in a low-resource environment, even if if you're not asset-rich, if trusted with the opportunity and structured correctly, can repay loans and use that money to invest in productive activities that lift household incomes. And so that was super inspiring. And then after college, one of my best friends from college, the kid down the hall for me, my freshman year, he ended up being one of the co-founders of PayPal. And so Johnny and I worked at the same management consulting firm, and I was just a terrible management consultant. But I just wanted to try something else besides making PowerPoint slides.
Premal actually has this PowerPoint slide, which I've seen when he's told his personal life story before, and the x-axis is time and the y-axis is happiness, and the chart shows him going to college and he's really happy, and then going to Mercer Management Consulting out of college, and it's the nadir of the chart, and then it puts back up again.
It's just, if you're in consulting, first of all, we all have a gift to give, and I think
for some people that gift is powerful.
I think that's right. We just kind of want to tune to what makes us come most alive, right? And so I don't think for me it was consulting, but luckily PayPal, and they just they would take, they just were hiring like crazy at the time, and so I joined in the early days of that, and that was such a eye-opening experience because complete strangers on eBay at the time, would use PayPal to buy and sell not just Beanie Babies, but really higher ticket priced items like computers. And 1 every 7 seconds, a car is sold on eBay. That's crazy. 2 decades ago, to buy a car from a complete stranger in another city would be kind of nuts. I still probably don't feel comfortable buying a car online, but people do. And there was something that if you could create a platform that is inspired by opportunity but sustained by trust, that it can unlock all of this, in the case of eBay, strangers engaging in commerce. And for me, because of that early experience in India, but also learning about microcredit, I was just curious, could you use PayPal to make a loan to someone across wealth and geographic divides? So I was just absolutely obsessed by that idea. I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs here. You're probably totally obsessed with something. You believe you have a correct idea, and hopefully this correct idea will spread. And I was probably delusional, and was running around. And I went back to India on a sabbatical and tried to launch it, and it failed. But luckily, I met two others here who actually were living right here in Noe, Matt Flannery, Jessica Jackley, and we started talking about this kind of idea of person-to-person microcredit, and we joined forces.
When was that?
That was in 2005. And I don't know how many of you all, there's so much drama in these, early founder stories and,
that's what
startup stories. Yeah. Bring it, right? I don't know if I have. I will say one thing about, for those of you who are experiencing, if you have, say, a co-founder, and, you're both equally vested and it's unclear, the best advice I got was from Steve Chen. Steve Chen was one of the co-founders of YouTube with Chad Hurley. They were leading through, a lot of crazy growth. He said that all co-founders fight, but like a good marriage, when you fight, you should come out stronger at the end, not weaker. And so I thought that was useful to kind of think about as a guiding frame. Anyways, we're kind of all over the place. Where Kiva started then was, a first set of borrowers from East Africa were posted up, and when they repaid, then we opened it up to more folks. And the real kind of, it was about a year. No one was really coming to the website, and I thought we'd all have to go back and get day jobs. We're all volunteers, just to sustain it. We wouldn't fold it, but it wasn't clear that it was going to work because no one was coming to the website. But then, in 2006, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize, which educated average Americans around this concept of microfinance, and we just happened to be this website that allowed you to be a microlender. And then we were on this PBS documentary called PBS Frontline, which I didn't know how many people watched, but it was Halloween night. We were actually out in the Mission District, I was in a penguin costume, and it was playing, we kind of aired, and then we just went out, and it turned out that it struck. We found our group of folks who believed, and then our website was down for 4 days. We put up a PayPal button that said "Help." You melted our servers. We were on a $20 a month server plan, and so we just needed to kind of upgrade everything. And we raised $130,000 through our PayPal account. Just from we weren't even a 501c3 yet. You wouldn't even get a tax deduction. Wow. People just trusted us based on that PBS Frontline documentary, and so those kinds of things then allowed us to put focus on healthcare and kind of really invest in core infrastructure, and then now Kiva today has just crossed over $1 billion in loans from everyday people, supporting 2.5 million entrepreneurs, 80% who are women, with a 97% repayment rate.
That's awesome.
So that's the whole.
That's awesome. And you kind of touched on this in what you just said, but why do you think? Because I've looked at the charts of number of new users per year, right? And it just exploded in 2006, 2007. So was it all press? Was that the secret, or you kind of touched on it was good timing with Muhammad Yunus winning the Nobel Peace Prize for microfinance? What were the kind of, why did it explode when it did?
Well, I think because at that time, Muhammad Yunus and microcredit and people, and there was also, remember, Web 2.0, people were talking about that, and the promise of social, it was kind of post-Friendster, kind of MySpace was coming into its place, and, Kiva just hit a lot of those trends, I felt, you could see another human being around the planet and invest in them as a partner, and then getting repaid was so mind-blowing to people. That was just not what we thought of when we thought of charity. And the climate back then was, I think Hurricane Katrina happened, and people donated to, say, the Red Cross, which does amazing work.
It's pretty abstract.
But it's abstract, and then there's these stories of not knowing where your money goes, and so on and so forth. And so I think we caught some of those things. But, kind of to acknowledge something which is, a press-driven growth thing is not a repeatable, scalable type model. And so kind of as the years went by, we were looking to find other growth engines, and we struggled on that. And luckily, we had an engagement model where people, like Regina was saying, I have a little bit of money in Kiva and I get repaid, and it keeps people coming back to the site, and maybe you'll buy a gift card for someone else. But the rate of growth isn't nearly what it was in the early days. Yeah.
So in those early days, you talked there about kind of, it was amazing timing for all of those reasons you mentioned, but what did you and the team do to kind of execute? How did you get that PBS Frontline? What were the other kind of tactics and growth? How were you executing to capitalize on the moment that you had?
I mean, honestly, I'd be making it up if I said we did these things.
And this great strategy.
I honestly think it probably,
slides.
In spite of us, the whole thing. And it felt like a boulder going down the hill and running after it. That's really what it felt like. And we were all just trying to learn as fast as we can. And we worked a lot, and we cared, and we just cared. And we found, folks like you who just, willing to quit your management consulting job and come work for free. And I don't know. And I think we just, invest in systems that allow people, self-service systems and volunteer management systems that allow people to participate in the cause in a productive way. I'm glad we did that. I think I think one of the influential things for me back then was, at the time, it was Obama versus Hillary. You remember that? And there was this article that came out around kind of the difference between Obama's campaign and Hillary's campaign. And Hillary's campaign, it was argued, was running much more of a command and control structure. And Obama's campaign was kind of like, they let go of like brand guidelines. And so you remember Obama Girl and like these, like, do you remember that? Like, it was a really awesome song and a great thing. And it's just like, that was really influential to us around like just letting go and allowing more people to feel empowered as a leader. And so, you know, I was just talking to, was it Johanna? Yep. You know, you're like the president of the Conscious Capital chapter of San Francisco, and so John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, co-founder, you know, is all into conscious capitalism and like promoting that, and he's letting go so that someone like Johanna, like someone really, really talented, can actually run point here in the Bay Area and kind of replicate that. And I'm really a big fan of allowing people who are seeking purpose, and you're doing it, you know, you have a day job, and then you're still, you know, you're doing this hustle at night. And I think systems that can figure that out, it's kind of obvious now.
So a couple of questions on that. Like, firstly, are you there talking about like within the Kiva team?
Yeah.
Or like within the Kiva community more broadly, and kind of how did that manifest? Like, what were some of the examples where you were kind of letting go in that way?
Like an early version of Kiva was that we were trying to do the full value chain, where we literally were working through a pastor in Uganda who would hand out loans to his congregation.
How did that?
It did not go well because it turned out, and so you know, one of the things I've observed about Kiva is that we have a group of folks. A good chunk of what we do is around risk management and keeping out, I don't know, the bad, the kind of the fraud, so that all this good can flourish. But the group that's responsible for that risk management, like for such a hopeful four-letter brand and such a hopeful thing, it's like we've seen so many times where trust has been violated, and so you know, early on we're working with this pastor in Uganda, and we loved it because he's giving out the loans and it's at zero interest to his congregation, and then, you know, 60% of that money was, you know, stolen, and you know, we learned some hard lessons early on around, you know, okay, well, we're not the specialists in kind of working in all these communities. We need to partner with specialists, great high-quality NGO microlenders. Or we're not, I don't speak Spanish that well. I'm on Google Translate, you know, and a loan has just come in from Honduras. I'm like trying to translate. We should open up kind of essentially like a Wikipedia type software. Are you going to crack up? Are you getting the giggles?
No, I was cracking up because you're talking about how we've really decided we need to work with these microfinance institution intermediaries because they would get at risk management.
Yeah.
And then the reason I came to Kiva was to basically take those out and lend directly to the borrower again.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting.
And our payment rate was terrible.
Well, I mean, so, you know, when you think you're doing something good, then there's the shadow side that becomes really apparent, and so like a really kind of a meta thing is I don't know, like, you know, in this whole like give advice thing, like I don't know, like I really don't know, like in fact, like my whole thing now is like I'm more committed to just growing than to being right, and time will tell what may be true, but like it's hard to know certain counterfactuals. So let me just get into the details of this. We started working with microfinance banks around the world, and great, the repayment rate is high on Kiva because they were really good microlending institutions. But at the same time, the average interest rate in microfinance is about 35-40%. And that sounds really high to people. You know, wait a minute, I'm giving a 0% interest loan, and like some group is charging 35-40%. You better earn a lot on that cow that you've just purchased. Your return on capital better exceed your cost of capital. Otherwise, that household might actually be going into debt and not building assets. And our mission at Kiva, when we founded it, was to connect people through lending to alleviate poverty. And alleviation of poverty is about building wealth, not about creating more debt spirals. And so, you know, there was a lot of like just discovery as we went along the process around, even though we believed in microcredit, like as it was far from perfect. And if we want to stay true to the mission of alleviating poverty, then we need to try new things that not only try to, like, you know, not only for growth's sake, but for quality, to actually ensure that we're reaching folks who are truly underserved and we're really helping them build income. And so the experiment that we ran, that you led, Johnny, was what if, this is a few years into Kiva and we started feeling like we had a handle on things, on the risk in terms of high repayment rates. What if we could actually now go back to the founding roots of it? Instead of working through maybe a pastor that, disappointed us in Uganda, like what if Johnny and his team could find other community-based organizations that would lend at zero interest and it'd be directly person to person? And what we found is that whereas Kiva Classic with microfinance banks had a 97% repayment rate, this Kiva Zip program where you go person to person and we try to use like people vouching for you online and so on and so forth, had like an 80% repayment rate and it was also falling. 85, yeah. It's interesting. And so, there's this challenge between breadth and depth and sustainability that we were always trying to manage. And so I think what's really interesting about what I'm so proud of about the Kiva team is that we held the questions and we didn't get complacent, or at least from my observation, like we didn't just kind of believe that big and scale was the way to impact. We actually kind of started questioning fundamentally, wait a minute, like how much good are we actually doing, and are we appropriate use of the internet community's trust and subsidy, and do we need to really change models so that we can actually be assured of the impact here? And a lot of that was like a bunch of heady stuff in the back end that my mom, when she's using the website, she wouldn't read all that stuff. But I was proud that we held these uncomfortable truths and we kind of unbundled issues and we tried to work them so that we felt better about the impact that we are trying to facilitate.
And on that subject of impact, you just mentioned that framework. I think you came up with this at Kiva. I remember.
Actually, Reid Hoffman came up with it.
Okay.
He's one of our board members.
Very smart guy. And so breadth times depth times sustainability. I'd never heard of that framework. I'm thinking about impact before we had those discussions at Kiva. But can you talk more about that? Because I think for someone that's whether they work for a for-profit social enterprise or a non-profit, I found it a very, very helpful way to think about the aggregate impact that we were having as an organization.
Yeah, one of the things I feel, particularly here in Silicon Valley, is the federalization of scale. Scale must be impacted. And I think now we're all living long enough through this tech thing where we're seeing the shadow side of that, and so it's not that, Facebook isn't just de facto, they're problems that we need to address. And with Kiva, I think we're getting a lot of people were really focused, I felt like, on just like how big we were. And if we're just simply growing and doing what the markets would have done, and we're not actually confident in the actual impact of the microloan because the high interest rates, or maybe the group that was being reached was already reached by other microfinance banks that didn't need the internet community subsidy. Like these questions of depth of impact, not breadth of impact, they were really valuable, and it's hard to measure that in a succinct way. Like McDonald's talks about number of burgers sold. You can talk about like your loan volume growth. You can talk about like number of people, but what about like the depth to which they were financially excluded? What about the kind of way that they were able to either increase their income through a productive asset or maybe save money through an avoided cost because they were able to switch from dirty fuels to kind of a clean burning cook stove? Like these kinds of deeper questions were, I mean, I sound like academic, but like they were so important. And I felt like at times people really valued like the simple scale metrics, and then if they wanted to understand how successful you were, they'd look at repayment rate. But arguably, if we're actually trying to do good philanthropy, we should be starting where the markets are failing. And if we actually have a 97% repayment rate, maybe we're actually not taking enough risk. And so we should actually be pushing where banks are truly unwilling to go, and even existing microfinance banks are unwilling to go. And that's where crowdfunding, where our ability to have like a personal connection with someone, that kind of connection creates empathy, and the empathy will create a generosity. And if you get paid back 80 cents on the dollar, that still might be an overperforming donation, not an underperforming investment. Does that make sense? And with that 80 cents on the dollar or loss tolerance, we may be able to go into a more rural area or work with riskier farmers or do things like student lending, where, in the developing world, tons of people could go to a great college, but there's not enough scholarship money there, and there's no student loan market. And so unfortunately, they go back to their village and they basically forego a lifetime of, just contribution, really, not only what they could earn. And what if we could actually, crowdfunding could actually be kind of fund the first few cohorts of 10-year student loans with a 6-year grace period, so the student could graduate from university, go get that job in an air-conditioned place in Phnom Penh, actually start earning money, and then pay back that. And then we could prove that someone who goes to, say, a polytechnic university here with this kind of degree will pay back at this kind of interest rate, and then show local banks that, hey, start doing 10-year student loans. Because, by the way, the average loan in microfinance is only 6 months long, and you have to pay back every other week or every month. It is so far away from these kind of mortgage loans of 30 years or student loans. But these products allow for really valuable things around us flourishing. And that's where I thought Kiva could play. But what that would mean is that our repayment rates would actually start falling. And so that, it's kind of trying to explain not only breadth, but the depth of our impact. And then, of course, we need to do this and still be around. And that's where the sustainability piece comes in.
One of the challenges, the thing we had at Kiva was it's very easy to measure breadth, right?
Yeah.
It's a number of loans you make, dollars of loans. It's quite easy to measure sustainability as well. It's like revenue coming in, costs going in. We had an operational self-sustainability metric where it's like how much of our revenue is kind of self-sustaining from individual tips from lenders versus big grants, which are less sustainable. The breadth side is a lot harder to measure.
The depth side.
The depth side, sorry.
Yeah.
So we had like this catalytic measure, percentage of loans as catalytic. On the direct side, we could look at percentage of our borrowers that were women or of color or median household income, but it was just quite hard, which I wonder if that's sometimes why it's like easy to kind of fetishize breadth and scale, because it's just so much easier to measure it.
Yeah, and I'm a huge believer, arguably like the social impact of Google is greater than most any other social enterprise. I mean, you have people looking neonatal education via YouTube videos in a language that is accessible. I mean, how do you put a price on that? And so there is real value to things that have scaled and brought down the cost of things. But I think, we have to look at quality. And big does not equal good is a big lesson that I've learned.
So another thing that I thought some folks might be interested in, either at this point of the career or down the line, like, there's I feel like the social enterprise movement has sprung up, and impact investing on the finance side, in between kind of philanthropy on one hand and like profit maximizing investing on the other hand. And then from a company perspective, you could be a non-profit or you could be a for-profit, and now there's public benefit corporations and B Corps. And so I guess like, if you could wind the clock back, I mean, one way of approaching this question is if you could wind the clock back, would you still make Kiva a non-profit? Like, as people are thinking about, should I start a non-profit? Should I start a for-profit social enterprise? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. I would, based on what I know, because it's so much bigger than Kiva, and I think I continue to make. I'm proud that we started as a nonprofit, and we tried to actually address market failures, and I think that WeFunder and others are real great examples of mission-based for-profits that are coming, into the space and innovating new models. And sure, are there things that might be lost as a nonprofit? Maybe ability to offer, employees in Silicon Valley, equity packages and so on and so forth. Yeah, but at the same time, I thought there was a clarity around why we existed, and so when microcredit itself, when we started seeing, it wasn't only just the high interest rates, but the kind of the mixed impact evidence and the kind of the over indebtedness in certain markets, like in Nairobi or in southern India. Like, instead of us just kind of saying, well, we're profit maximizing, and so we're just going to, kind of be Rocket Mortgage and just do it better and better and like scale, which I trust Rocket Mortgages of India will exist. Like, they will come in because there's money to be made. what about being a great nonprofit that runs with rigor or attempts to run with rigor and holds ourselves accountable to that, but really focuses on market failures where there's an opportunity to reach folks and help improve their lives and improve the business case so that the markets can come in and help scale it up. Like, I think that to me, I felt like there was a gap about that, and we were just having this conversation about a big community foundation locally here where people will donate the largesse that they've gotten from their their big tech payout, and I'm not resentful of it, except if you can just basically get you can kind of park it, and then even if you're going to it's in a donor advised fund and you're going to give all that money away to philanthropy. And by the way, most philanthropy in America just goes to churches and universities. But if you give it all the way to philanthropy, they were still largely reluctant of putting it into impact investing. And why? Why? Why is there such a reluctance? It's because, I think there's this kind of, we shift to scarcity when it comes to money at the most fundamental level, and and there's a lot of fear there, and so I think even if Kiva wasn't like $100 billion, that's okay, because I think there's room in society for ideas that try to stay pure to certain ideals, and so I'm glad we went that direction.
Downsides of going the nonprofit route?
Yeah, and I felt myself for this. Like, I think, looking back, I was a little bit too accommodating about. I could have probably run a tighter ship.
But is that a nonprofit thing, or?
Well, because some people would say, well, you could have attracted whatever different talent. I don't know if there's better or worse talent, but like people who are more motivated, more committed. And I have been in other environments where people might work more and more capably, and I have to acknowledge that you do have those tools when you can offer people really competitive compensation. And it's expensive to live here, and it was hard for our employees to sustain working there year after year. You gave it 7 years, but like you also have 2 children here, and you probably have to think about other things. And I think I would have probably opted to. Sal Khan over at Khan Academy pays really well, and so I think you can be a nonprofit and set expectations with your donors and so on and so forth, and really try to figure out what you need to do to really be rigorous. I don't think just being a for-profit makes you better.
You can have the salary increase discussions before, while I was at Kiva, really.
Yeah, I actually think that it's even tougher as a mission-based for-profit, because your investors, we were able to raise money that was ultra patient, and so it basically allowed for us to do things that I feel for folks who are trying to do mission-based things and raise from for-profit capital sources, because unless your model can confer either a cost advantage because of your purpose or some kind of marketing advantage, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to make those models work.
If you guys haven't seen it, there's a great, I think it's a TED Talk by Dan Pallotta. I think it's a little controversial, but I think it has some really, at least thought-provoking ideas in it around challenges that the nonprofit sector faces, one of which he talks about is compensation.
Yeah. By
the way, when you were talking earlier about the micro-entrepreneur investing in the cow, I thought of a great joke. What do you call it? What do you call the return on investing in a cow?
I don't know what, Johnny.
Return on capital.
Okay, I got one for you.
Okay.
Knock, knock.
Who's that?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting cow.
All right, so we're going to go. But,
we can keep going on.
Yeah, no. And this is the difference between a nonprofit and for-profit. We would just say there's no accountability if we just kind of keep going.
So one question I wanted to kind of just maybe end on, actually one more after this, but what do you left Kiva a few months ago, which must have been a huge decision after, I think, 12 years? What went into that decision, and what's next for you?
Well, I kind of talking about scarcity and abundance, like, another way of saying that is just fear versus love, right, internally. And, I think life energy is so precious. And I found myself not it wasn't as enlivening as the early years. And I kind of felt like Kiva, was an expression of my purpose, but it wasn't my purpose. And so staying felt like it wasn't fully in devotion to love and in service of love. And I know founders can stay on longer than they are of service. And, I didn't know what I was going to do next when I left, but I felt like it was time. It was time. And it was really wonderful to actually take the last 6 months and kind of sit out in the garden a bit, and work with a handful of social enterprises. And
also
learn
scary?
new things. A little scary, but, also just kind of another way of saying, fear versus love is threat versus trust, right? Like, I want to just trust in a friendly universe, and that, like, something will unfold, will be able to contribute in a way that is enlivening and in service of love. And I think that was exciting to me. And to do that.
And has the universe delivered yet?
Well, this hasn't been announced to the entire staff over there yet, but I just started on with one of the Kiva co-founders, went on to found another company in the global financial inclusion space called Branch, and it is it's an Android app that you download, and in Kenya or Mexico or India or Nigeria, and it uses the data on your phone to basically make an instant loan. And the promise of a kind of that method versus kind of classic microfinance, which has a lot of costs. Someone has to get up on a moped and go 2 hours out into a rural district. I mean, that adds up, and that's why the interest rates are 40%. I think the promise of being able to do kind of banking on one's phone, especially, and really designed for people at the base of the pyramid, there's incredible promise around of delivering lower cost loans and helping building assets for folks who I think are incredibly capable, but right now aren't well served. Yeah.
Last question from me. If someone is starting either a non-profit or a for-profit social enterprise, one piece of advice that you would leave them with?
Well, I'm so intrigued by, kind of conscious capitalism in our conversation. And maybe I could just give a book recommendation. I just finished Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman. If you all haven't read that, go check that out. That is just a beautiful piece of work. And then another kind of influential book for me is 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership by Diana Chapman. Good. Awesome. Yeah. Boom. So I would, maybe those are two things that can be good companions on your journey.
Adventure Capital is brought to you by your fundraising team here at WeFunder, which consists of Johnny Price, Katie Powers, and myself, Oliver Foyahan. We'll be sharing the adventures of one of our WeFunder founders every other week. If you have any comments, ideas, suggestions, or would just like to find out more about WeFunder or our founders, don't hesitate to contact us at hello@wefunder.com. We'll see you next time.